Welcome back, biologists. We're going to continue our discussion of vertebrate diversity now. We're into lecture number 2, so we're going to jump all the way to slide number 32, where we pick it up here with mammals. Now, mammals are represented by about 4,500 species, which compared to other vertebrate groups is actually the least speciose of all of the groups. There's the least number of species in this group. And of that, 3,200 of those mammal species are actually rodents, bats, shrews, or moles, which really are the smallest of all of the mammals. We are defined, because we are mammals too, are defined by, number one, having hair. Hair is a keratin-rich filament extending from hair follicles. And you've already heard of keratin before. We talked about it as being the protein that makes up reptile scales, and it also makes up the feathers of birds. So keratin is actually not a unique characteristic. The possession of hair may be, but the material that hair is made out of is not unique. However, in our case, it does aid in insulation, also for camouflage, and certain organisms use it for sensory structures. Think about a cat and its whiskers and how it might use those whiskers. Another defining characteristic is possessing mammary glands. Female mammals actually have mammary glands that secrete milk. And other notable mammal features include being endothermic. That is, we actually have the ability to maintain our own body temperature, very similar to birds, although it evolved for different reasons. We all possess a four-chambered heart, and we respire, that is, we breathe using a diaphragm. And that is very different from other kinds of vertebrates. Amphibians, for example, frogs also breathe by ventilating using lungs, but they do it by inflating using throat muscles. We don't do that. We breathe, we ventilate, and inflate our lungs by using a diaphragm. We also mostly possess placentas, although there are exceptions to this that we're going to talk about in a second. The placenta is an organ in most mammals that connects the developing fetus directly to the maternal blood. It acts almost like a filter or a scrubber, protecting the fetus, and then in some ways helping to clean up the waste products that are coming from the fetus so the mother doesn't get poisoned too. So it's a really important organ. Now, all of these things that I've mentioned, having hair, having mammary glands, being endothermic, having a placenta, these are all great things, but the reality is these are not left behind in fossil records. We don't see placentas in fossil records or the presence of being warm-blooded. So if we find bones, and these are all buried under rock, how do we know that it's a mammal? Well, it turns out that there are other mammal characteristics that help us identify bones as coming from a mammal. Number one, 7 neck bones. All mammals possess 7 neck bones, no more, no less. In addition, mammals, unlike reptiles and even birds, we possess 3 inner ear bones. That's a very important characteristic when you find a skull. Lastly, in mammals, our lower jaw is really made up of one piece of continuous bone on either side of our jaw. This is very different from reptiles that actually have multiple bones that make up their jaw. Now, in addition to that, we have other really interesting characteristics that separate us from reptiles. Our teeth dentition is actually very unique. We have teeth that are differentiated. And this is true whether you are a carnivore or an herbivore. We possess, in the case of a carnivore, we possess teeth up here for cutting. We also, and those are known as incisors. Canines are large fang-like structures that allow you to gnash through food. Then we have these premolars, which really help mix food up and cut it down. And then molars in the back here are for crushing. In herbivores, there's a little less of that differentiation, although it is still differentiated. These back teeth over here are molars, and then these front ones over here are premolars. And this is actually a very interesting development throughout the mammal lineage. You can actually pick any mammal, and there are going to be some variation of this dentition variation, whether you are a dog, an elephant, a human, a deer, or a beaver. Now, one group of mammals, the bats, This is the only self-powered flying mammal. There are other mammals that can glide, for example, flying squirrels, that don't actually fly, but bats actually use a leathery membrane wing to fly. And this leathery membrane, if you look really closely at this wing, is actually the fingers of this animal. So in this case, bats actually fly with their hands. Very interesting. Another thing about bats is that they are among the best echolocators on the face of the planet. Echolocation is also known as biosonar, where they actually create sound and bounce the sound off of objects that they're trying to detect, and the return signal actually will help them navigate and locate whatever it is they're looking for, whether they are insects or even if it's some low-hanging fruit or something like that. Not all bats do echolocation. Some bats, for example, fruit bats, oftentimes they don't echolocate nearly as much as those that are preying on insects. Now, the history of mammals is quite interesting. Remember, mammals have actually been around a very, very long period of time. In fact, they even predate the dinosaurs. Remember that they are emerging from that synaptid skull type of reptiles. So they went up their own lineage at the same time that dinosaurs were also evolving. So around 220 million years ago, these guys were all co-evolving. But mammals at that time were all very small, kind of shrew-like, insect-eating organisms that were pretty much all nocturnal. They were not active during the daytime. And we know that because of the size of the eye sockets on these early skeletons, on these early fossils. And they really approached their maximal diversity in the tertiary period, which was right after the dinosaurs, most of which went extinct, except, of course, for the birds, at about 65 million years ago. And we really have been quite numerous on this planet up until about 2 million years ago. So it was after the mass extinction of the dinosaurs where we really got to take off. Although for the last 15 million years, we have been somewhat on the decline. Now I've got a picture here of what's known as the Chicxulub crater in the Yucatan Peninsula. And this crater here, this image is actually taken from gravity satellite images of the location right around Mexico where a massive meteor struck our planet. And this is probably what broke the camel's back, the straw that broke the camel's back as far as the extinction of the dinosaurs, which we mentioned in the last lecture. Okay, so let's go over the main mammal varieties. There are a few mammal subclasses, the first one being Prototheria. Proto means early, and theria refers to the lineage of mammals. These mammals here actually lay eggs. I know that sounds very strange, but these are mammals that are still alive today. Only one living group is alive today. They're known as the monotremes, and we're going to talk about them in just a second. But they actually lay eggs just like a reptile. Okay? And they kind of hint at our reptile origins. The second group are the Theria, also known as the Eutheria. Eu means true, but we're just going to say Theria here. The Theria are all of the mammals that give live birth. And that term for giving live birth is known as being viviparous. Viviparous means live birth. There's two living groups here of Theria. There are the marsupials, the pouched mammals, which include koala bears, kangaroos, and then also the possums. And then the second group here are the placental mammals. That includes you, me, your dog, your cat, a cow, that sort of thing. Okay, let's go back through each of these groups. We'll talk about the monotremes first, the last remaining Prototheria. Then we'll move on to the marsupials and then the placental mammals, the last two of the Theria groups that we have represented. Okay, monotremes. Again, they lay eggs, and the term monotreme comes from this. Mono means one or single, and treme refers to the hole that your waist comes out of. Okay, so we call that a cloaca. A cloaca, if you were a reptile, would be the one hole, or even in a bird too, reptiles or birds. A cloaca is the hole out of which your feces, your urine, and your reproductive stuff all comes out of. Yes, I know, in you, there are more than one hole, right? Well, in the monotremes, there's only one. They have a cloaca, which is very reptile-like. And to only have one hole is a very reptile-like trait. It's where their feces, urine, and reproductive material comes out of. And they also are different from other mammals in that they don't have actual nipples like humans, like dogs, cats, or even kangaroos. So these animals simply extrude or they secrete milk directly from milk patches on their skin. The equivalent of nipples, but still, they are not actual nipples. There are only 3 species still remaining on this planet. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the monotremes were the dominant mammal species on the planet. Today, there are only 3 species left. The duck-billed platypus, which is shown here in this picture, is one of those species. And then there are 2 species of echidnas. There is a long-spined and also a short-spined echidna. And again, they lay eggs. Here's the echidna. Here is the platypus. They lay eggs that look just like this. The eggs hatch. And these babies then lap up the milk from these milk-producing glands on their underside. So they are very ancient mammals that have a lot in common with reptiles. Now marsupials, you know marsupials as being kangaroos, wombats, and those sorts of animals. They actually differ very much from monotremes in that they have embryonic development that is somewhat internalized, at least partly. And in some of these guys, they actually even have a short-lived placenta stage, although it doesn't last very long. And these little baby embryos are essentially given birth to, and this is a somewhat older picture. When they are given birth to, they emerge out of the vagina only possessing front legs. They don't even have hind legs yet. They're just this little fetus. And the challenging task here is that this fetus must then crawl up the fur of the mother and into the pouch. Now that distance is only like a foot or so, maybe less in smaller animals. But to an animal of this size, when it is just newly born, it might as well be a mile. Okay. Anyway, they get up into that pouch if they're fortunate enough, and then they latch onto a nipple and they continue to develop inside the pouch. So that is very different from the monotremes, isn't it? Now, kangaroos are kind of the quintessential example of a marsupial. Here is a little roo baby, a little joey that is actually developing inside the pouch. And when they develop over the course of a year or so, this is what they end up looking like. They're actually quite cute. And I actually have a video of a kangaroo birth on the website, so you should definitely check that one out. Now, the vast majority of marsupials are all isolated on Australia or the nearby islands to Australia. But there is one marsupial which is actually found in North America, Central America, and South America. Can you guys think of what that one marsupial is? If you said the Virginia possum, then you will have gotten that question right. In fact, if you say the Virginia possum on the next upcoming midterm, you'll get that question right on the exam. Yes, the Virginia possum is the only marsupial found outside of Australia and its surrounding regions. We'll get into why that is a little bit later. Okay, the last group of mammals, the placental mammals. Those mammals that possess a true placenta that nourishes the embryos, nourishes the embryo and also scrubs the blood of any toxins, removing CO2 and waste products, and providing oxygen and much needed food. In this case, the placenta actually forms both from the fetus and maternal tissue. They kind of intermesh, almost like 2 sponges, and they operate as a filtration system, kind of protecting one from the other. The young end up undergoing a whole lot of development internally, inside the mother, in the uterus, before they actually give birth. This is a huge advantage. I mean, I want you to think about the monotremes. Monotremes have to lay eggs. the likelihood that an organism is going to hatch and survive, well, okay, the chances are good, but they're not great. In the marsupials, it's a little bit better because if they manage to get up into that pouch after giving birth, well, then they're probably okay. But here in placental mammals, the vast majority of development of the young occurs inside the uterus. So it's much safer in there, and there's a greater chance that the organism is going to live. And, this is the vast majority of mammals, by the way. Most mammals are placental mammals. And yeah, this includes humans and all of our relatives. So we're now going to move on to primates. Primates, we're going to use them as simply an example of mammals. We could go off onto any direction here, but we're going to focus just on the hominids for right now. We are primates. You're a primate. Monkeys are primates. Apes and gorillas are all primates. And we evolved two very important features for being successful in a tree-dwelling environment. That's what arboreal means. Arboreal means tree-dwelling environment. And let's go over what those are. Number one, we developed grasping fingernails and toes. We have prehensile or grasping fingers and toes to go along with our prehensile or opposable thumb. Number two is the development of binocular vision. You'll notice that with primates, our eyes are set very, very much in the front of our face, where we can make binocular vision looking forward. We can tell objects that are far away versus objects that are very close better than most other organisms. A horse or even your dog has its eyes kind of set off to the sides, but in primates, we have binocular vision. So eyes towards the front of the face. And the nice thing about this is, remember, our initial ancestors are living up in the trees. If you can't navigate through the trees by negotiating distances, where are you going to end up? You're going to end up on the ground, probably dead. And so over evolutionary time, we were able to judge distance much better by having forward-facing eyes providing us with binocular vision. Now, primates emerged about 40 million years ago. That's the earliest primate split, and this split into two main groups. 40 million years ago, the first split was with the prosimians. Prosimians are the earliest and most ancient of all of the primates. There aren't very many alive today, only a few. You might know them as lemurs, lorises, and tarsiers, and you could look them up. This is what they look like. They're kind of cute. They have really big eyes, and that helps them with their visual acuity at night because they are pretty much all nocturnal. And the second group that splits off from these guys, these prosimians, is the anthropoids. Okay, what are the anthropoids? The anthropoids include monkeys, apes, and humans. That's right. This is a very interesting change here, though, from the earlier ancestors, certainly from our prosimian ancestors. Prosimians pretty much remained nocturnal. We know that because of the size of their eyes. Anthropoids actually evolved to have a diurnal existence, to live their life during the daytime. And this is where true full color vision evolved in mammals, in the primates. And this is because being diurnal, it's to your advantage to be able to tell color differences. It's less important to be able to do that if you're fully nocturnal. Another trend in the anthropoids was having an expanded brain, much larger brain. And this allowed for much more complex social interactions. We tend to care for our young for very extended periods of time. For some of us, that extends all the way until our kids are 18 or beyond. But even in other primates or in other anthropoids, a few years of caring for your young is still quite impressive. And because of this, we require a very long period of time for our brains to develop. Although these two ugly-looking guys down here, maybe that's not necessarily true, but they're obviously humans. Okay, so let's fast forward it now to 30 million years ago. 30 million years ago is where we draw the distinction between New World monkeys, New World monkeys are those that migrated to South America before the Atlantic Ocean was as large as it is today. And New World monkeys are all arboreal. They all are tree dwellers. This is one right over here. You might have seen this guy actually in a lot of movies, including the Indiana Jones movies. The difference between the New World monkeys and the next group that we're going to talk about, the Old World monkeys, is that these guys actually have a prehensile tail. They can actually grasp, hold on, and even hang from their tail. I wouldn't recommend you trying that with your tail. Okay, Old World monkeys are these guys over here, and they include baboons, but also one group that we're going to distinguish here, the hominids. The hominids. And these guys, the Old World monkeys and the hominids, never made it over to the New World, to South America, Central America area. These guys are still kind of confined to Africa. No prehensile tails, no prehensile tails at all. And so now let's focus. So we've split off the New World monkeys. We've now split off the Old World monkeys. Now we're going to focus in the hominoids. The hominoids. Hominoids include apes and the hominids, the humans and chimpanzees. So even though chimpanzees, we kind of consider them to be apes, new genetic evidence actually places them far closer to us than to other apes. So this is kind of the lineage where we see degrees of relatedness. Again, going back to the prosimians here, we have the lemurs and the lorises. They are the first to split off. The tarsiers are next. These three groups here make up the prosimians. We have the New World monkeys kind of emerging after that, and then the Old World monkeys, and finally the hominoids, which include the gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and the hominids. Okay. So now that we've got that straight, let's talk about apes versus the hominids. Apes and hominids are in fact very close relatives, and a common ancestor to both of us probably was an arboreal climber. It was very good at that. However, both of our groups really focus now on being on the ground. Hominids, which include you and me, we are bipedal. We actually walk on two legs, and we walk upright. That's very different from the way that apes walk. Apes are knuckle walkers. They actually lean forward. Their back is prone, kind of like this, and they support themselves not just with their feet, but also with the knuckles of their front arms. Now, what is the ramification of all of this? Well, it means that we have separated down two evolutionary lineages where humans have a curved vertebral column. You have to curve the vertebral column in order for us to be able to stand up straight. And in humans, it also means that the spinal cord actually is extending at the base of the skull instead of from the back of the skull. That's the major difference there. So this is what distinguishes apes from hominids. Now, let's go to a couple of, or to the evolutionary history of the hominids, the group in which you and I belong to. Now, the genus that you and I belong to is this one right here, Homo. We are Homo sapiens. And over evolutionary time, over the last, 10 million years or so, we can identify about 3 to 7 species of Homo genus members. And today, in this modern era that we live in, there's only one surviving member of this genus, Homo sapiens, you and me. However, predating the Homo genus was another genus, Australopithecus, which lived, some species of whom lived before us, but also some species of Australopithecus may have overlapped Homo a little bit. There are about 7 known species right now of Australopithecus, and they are much older and they had smaller brain cases compared to our genus of Homo. And in fact, there are even older lineages than this to consider. And in every case that we have, in all of our fossil evidence, being bipedal appears to be the hallmark of hominid evolution. It seems to be the thing that separates us from other organisms. I've included a video, a link to a video called Walking with Cavemen, that you are obligated to watch. So it's not a very long video. It's a little over an hour. Get some popcorn, sit down with some friends, and especially friends in the class if you want, and watch this video. This movie does an extraordinary job of illustrating the evolutionary trends within the hominid group. So definitely check it out. Pay close attention to the trends, which species actually corresponds with which trends. I'm going to highlight it in the next slide, but you must watch that movie to pick up the details. There will be questions on the next midterm from that movie. This slide here illustrates the vast diversity of hominids that has existed over the last 7.5 million years. We know this from fossil records, very complete and robust fossil records. And about half of these species here are actually mentioned in the movie Walking with Cavemen. I want to highlight a couple of them, but make sure that you watch that movie so that you know all of the details. The first one I want to draw your attention to here is Australopithecus afarensis. This was among the first discoveries, kind of linking hominid evolution to our most distant ancestor. And the first fossil that was found actually was named Lucy. And just for trivia's sake, for those that are into this kind of thing, the fossil was named because a Beatles song happened to be playing on the radio, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So they named it Lucy. Another one that I want to draw your attention to here is Homo habilis. Homo habilis was the first tool maker in our direct lineage. Also one that was mentioned that is not in our lineage, but was alive at the same time as Homo habilis, was Australopithecus boisei. So actually, this is quite fascinating. Right around this time, there were actually 1, 2, 3, 4 hominids that were all alive together, competing for resources and dwelling in the same sorts of areas. Kind of amazing, isn't it? I mean, we kind of enjoy the fact that we are the only one on the planet right now, but there have been times in the past when there have been more than one hominid, and in fact, in some cases, up to 7. Another one I want to mention here is Homo ergaster, advanced tool user. This guy made tools a whole lot better than Homo habilis did, and you can probably attribute your voice to Homo ergaster. It was one of the first to have the appropriate bone structure in its neck to accommodate speech and voices. Now, Homo ergaster is probably very closely related to Homo erectus. Homo erectus was actually found in Asia and is probably among our direct ancestors as well. Homo heidelbergensis. This is a related species here that invaded Europe. And finally, Homo neanderthalensis, a very cold-tolerant relative of ours that was able to withstand the challenges of the last ice age quite well. However, the one that remains is you and me, Homo sapiens. And to distinguish us, modern humans, from any other Homo sapiens early ancestors that may have existed hundreds of thousands of years ago, we give it a subspecies name too. We are Homo sapiens sapiens. Now, let me show you a couple of fun pictures. Australopithecus, again, characterized from many, many fossils, hundreds of fossils in Africa. They were not very tall. They were only about 1 meter tall, which is about 3.5 feet or so, and they didn't weigh very much. They were only about 18 kilograms in size. Their brain capacity, or their size of their brain, was similar to that of modern apes as far as size goes. They also walked upright, and they looked kind of like this. This is me, by the way, and this is my daughter, my little vertebrate, and we are actually standing next to the original fossil, the first fossils of Australopithecus afarensis that was discovered. This is Lucy. This is Lucy right here. Kind of neat. Okay, what is the advantage of bipedalism? Why is it important to be bipedal? Well, because when our ancestors were evolving, way back about 4 million years ago or so, the world was much colder, and there were not as many tropical forests on the planet. And in fact, there was mostly grassland and open woodland. So with lots of tall grass growing around, it was to our advantage to be able to stand upright and look over the tall grass. But for what reason? Well, because, well, you don't want to be eaten by these guys, right? I showed you this picture before, and back in the first one of the first lectures. That's a lion peering at you through the tall grass. So having a big brain to be able to identify this, and also being bipedal where you can stand up in the brush and actually look out over it, that was extremely valuable. And we had this substantial brain growth that occurred right around 2 million years ago, probably as a direct result of being bipedal. Very important. Now, our genus in particular first evolved from an Australopithecine ancestor around 2 million years ago. We are probably the direct descendants from Australopithecus afarensis, and the immediate descendant from Australopithecus afarensis was Homo habilis. And in about 1960 was when the first Homo habilis specimens were discovered, and they were discovered with stone tools near them, like buried with them, which was kind of interesting. They definitely closely resembled Australopithecus, but they had much larger brains. Finally, again, there's Homo ergaster, the first advanced tool maker that actually was probably thinking about what he was doing while making his tools, unlike Homo habilis, which did it kind of just out of instinct. And also the human voice. We know this again because they had the anatomy of their throat was such that it could actually accommodate voice. Homo ergaster was related to Homo erectus, which invaded Asia. Not a whole lot of tool use going on in Homo ergaster, or at least I take that back. Not a whole lot of stone tool use by Homo ergaster. And that's not because they were less intelligent, but because they relied on a different kind of tool. All around them in Asia were vast forests of bamboo. Bamboo doesn't leave all that much in the way of fossils, but we know that bamboo was very prevalent in that area, and we know that these guys had to survive somehow, and not having access to stone tools means they had to use something that perhaps was a little less permanent. Now, modern humans. Modern humans really are emerging first in Africa around 600,000 years ago. And out of this, three main species are evolving. Homo heidelbergensis, which is really the oldest one, that actually coexisted with Homo erectus. Homo neanderthalensis, which was a whole lot shorter and stockier than you or me, and these guys were very much able to deal with the cold temperatures that were present during the last ice age. And then finally, Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, sapiens actually means wise man. I want to talk a little bit about Homo neanderthalensis now. This is a completely different species that lived simultaneous to Homo sapiens, our earliest Homo sapien ancestors. They were, by all accounts, just as sophisticated as Homo sapiens. They made a whole variety of different tools. They showed a lot of forethought by taking care of their sick and even burying their dead. This is truly evidence of symbolic thinking, the fact that they could even do this. However, they abruptly disappeared around 34,000 years ago, and we're not exactly sure why, but it probably had something to do with competition with Homo sapiens, with us, essentially, with our ancestors. They were essentially replaced by the Cro-Magnons, which were the earliest Homo sapiens. And the two species may have interbred, but it doesn't look like genetically they did. It's unlikely that they did, although certain researchers might disagree. We had a complex social organization, very similar to Homo neanderthalensis, but we obviously had a greater amount of symbolic thinking going on, as is evidenced by the fact that we made elaborate cave paintings. And that's what you're looking at here on the right. These cave paintings were made by the earliest Homo sapiens, and we were thought to have had a full language ability. And so this leads to Homo sapiens, you and me. We are the only surviving hominid left on the planet. And we have this incredible progressive increase in brain size. In some cases, almost 50% larger than the next hominid that existed in our distant past. We also, therefore, by having a larger brain, became very effective tool makers and tool users. And this extended to our ability to think as well. It's really interesting, and you will see in the movie that having time, simply having time to sit around and contemplate the world around you, uh, really makes your mind wander and begins to think of other possibilities. You begin to create symbolic language, not just referring to things that are right in front of you that you can see, but actually symbolic language, coming up with words that mean things that you're not immediately looking at. It's akin to inventing stories of things that might exist under the ocean, even though you've never seen what's under the ocean. That's symbolic thought. Now, we also have developed extensive cultural experience. Now, it's not to say that other animals don't develop culture, they might, but nowhere near to the extent that we do. We actually have decoupled ourselves in many ways from the natural selective process that other organisms are exposed to, and that we were in fact exposed to ourselves up until very recently. We now have the capacity to actually mold our environment instead of changing over evolutionary time. So this is kind of the ultimate advantage that humans have kind of adapted over evolutionary time, was the ability to separate ourselves from our natural world. Now, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Well, we will deal with that when we come to the sustainability lectures at the very end. In the meantime, make sure that you watch the movie Walking with Cavemen. I know that you will enjoy it. There will be questions on it on the exam coming up. And with that, everybody, we are now done with the vertebrates. I will see you all inside.